So today we have the ultimate pleasure of hearing from Dr. Julie Nicholson and Julie Kurtz. Dr. Julie Nicholson is a professor of practice in the School of Education at Mills College, where she's been a faculty member since 2005 and directed several innovative programs, including the Leadership Program in Early Childhood, a joint MBA/MA Educational Leadership Program, and the Center for Play Research. Julie Nicholson is also co-founder and co-director of the Center for Equity in Early Childhood Education, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving equity for young children and families, and the early childhood workforce dedicated to serving them. She is the author of 12 books and many peer-reviewed articles focused on early childhood. She has many years of experience participating in policy committees, serving on nonprofit boards, and leading professional development across the US and internationally. She taught young children for 10 years in preschool and public kindergarten classrooms. Julie Kurtz is an author and national speaker, consulting and training on trauma and resilience. She promotes the concept of optimal brain integration to maximize human growth potential. Julie is the founder and CEO for the Center for Optimal Brain Integration. Julie has co-authored, just lost my place. Julie has co-authored several books, including topics such as trauma-informed practices for early childhood educators, self-care for early childhood educators, trauma-informed practices for early childhood leaders, trauma-responsive family engagement in early childhood, and she is the author of Understanding My Brain, Becoming Human or Humane, ages 4 to 8 and 5 to 10. And Julie is also the creator of the phone and tablet application app, Trigger Stop, Sensory and Emotional Check-In, designed specifically for children 3 to 8 to promote sensory and emotional literacy and to support self-regulation. I have to tell you, I recently participated in sessions which were presented by these ladies on trauma response practices. And with the added stressors and trauma that so many of us continue to feel during this pandemic, I was also really pleased to hear about their extensive work surrounding self-care for early educators. As Ms. Robertson mentioned earlier, it is just paramount that we take time to not only learn about this, but implement those practices for ourselves. During the next few hours, I hope that you will take a moment for yourself to lean in and let the messages these ladies will share with you resonate in your heart and mind to fill your buckets today. It is now my honor to turn the time over to Julie and Julie.
Thank you, Dina, and hello to everybody. It's just such an honor to be here. I'm joining you from very snowy Lake Tahoe, California, where we've had more snow than they've had in the last 50 years. So I took this picture a few days ago. I'm going to let Julie say her intro as I pull up the slides for us now.
Oh, Dina, I just love your comment about leaning in. I feel like in this time of stress, it's been so hard for all of us to be present in the moment. And I've been working on that personally myself. So I'm really grateful to be here today, and I'll take your words to heart. I'm going to try that as well, to lean in, to be present in the moment.
Okay, can everybody see that now? Great, okay. Well, we are just so happy to be here. Here's the title of our talk, really thinking about enhancing joy, resilience, and healing. And as was said, it's not just about self-care, but creating cultures, schools, programs, and communities where we all have an ethic of care to one another. So our topics today, we have a short time with you, although we're so happy to have both this keynote and then a follow-up. So in the keynote today, we're going to talk about neurobiology of stress and something that one of our personal heroes, Bruce Perry, who's an expert. Many of you might have heard of his name in trauma and in resilience, and he's a psychiatrist with a deep knowledge of the brain. He talks about something called state-dependent functioning, so we're going to talk about that. You never want to talk about stress and trauma without talking about the factors that predict resilience, so we're going to share that. And we're going to talk about, for yourself and for others, when you're stressed, what are those pathways, things that you can do right away to reduce your stress, the pathways to regulation and to stress reduction. We're going to have, as was mentioned, we love having your thoughts, your interactions, your questions. We will be constantly monitoring the chat. We like to give you lots of options, so please feel free to share in the chat publicly, but also to write to us, either Julie or I, privately. If we get a direct private message from you, we will share out your comment without naming who you are, having that confidentiality. And there will be several times where we ask you to share ideas in the chat. We're going to end today with a Padlet, so you'll have a chance to, we'll create a Padlet together. And we are hoping that all technology goes well. We do some music throughout, so there will be some times where you hear music. If you don't like that, just feel free to sort of mute your sound for a minute, and we'll tell you when we're back online. Anything to add, Julie?
I'm good.
Okay. So we wanted to start by recognizing that a really, really important part of self-care is being able to actually name the stressors, the trauma, the feelings, and to acknowledge what we're all experiencing. We're going to talk about why this is so important, but an important part of self-care is being able to say, it's okay to say what's going on and to acknowledge that I'm not okay right now, or I'm not feeling my best. It's okay to not be okay during a pandemic with stressors that have just, ballooned in many, many ways for us. So I'm going to put some music on, and this is the first time we're going to invite you just to share, again, publicly or privately. If you look at this word cloud, you might see some of your stressors. There might be things that aren't listed here, but we just want to give you a minute to share some of the things that you've been managing, some of your lived experiences, those stressors, those things that make things hard right now. Okay.
Three deep breaths, 10 steps backwards, going backwards. Now I'm switching lanes, tire marks on my heart. It don't be the same.
I'm hearing health.
Rest your weary heart, dry your teary eyes. I know you were scarred and torn apart inside. Darling, so am I.
Critical decisions on a daily basis, caring for relatives, communication issues, understaffed finances, behaviors, workload, and mental health.
She just go to class and come back. Yeah.
Caseload.
So pass that thing my way. La, da, da.
Look, you can see things there that might help you feel less alone. You see other people are experiencing what you are.
Let out alongside, alright, why am I trying?
Long hours, high anxiety, family challenges, new jobs, time, managing COVID in the workplace.
Helping everyone and needing help in return. Family challenges, new jobs, time.
communication with the administration, helping the needy. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We want to just bear witness to this and hold a space that says we may not have a lot of control over all of this, but we're here today to work together and use our relationships to give you some sense of how you might find some coping, some sense of connection, some ways to navigate through this, not just alone, but together here. Thank you so much.
And while Julie's just kind of transitioning us, there's a concept that Dr. Daniel Siegel comes up with called name it to tame it. And the science behind that is the more we can name how we feel, the more it can calm the regulatory system. So that's why we wanted to start this off this way, so we can really name what we're all going through, whether we put it in the chat or just thought of it and held it in our mind as we leaned into this.
Yes, thank you, Julie. So that feeds right into this idea here of, I'm going to talk about state-dependent functioning. What does that mean? It's kind of a scientific word for this idea that your brain and your body is constantly, without even your awareness, it's literally just happening unconsciously. It's looking inside of it's scanning inside of your body to see if there's any sense of threat. Are you hungry? Are you cold? Are you tired? Are you worried? So those are some of the, or, the opposite. Do you feel well rested? Do you feel warm? Do you feel like your needs are met? So it's scanning internally. It's also scanning externally, the environment all around you, to see if you feel a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of safety, feeling a sense of being respected. And any internal or external threat is going to automatically send you up what is called this arousal continuum, from calm and alert to alarm, fear, and then all the way up to a sense of terror. And your body and brain is doing this all throughout the day. This is very dynamic, very fluid. And we're going to talk about in a minute what happens as people and groups and programs and communities and schools and even nations go up and down this continuum. Now, there's a couple of things we want to say that influence, and this is from decades of research, that we know send you from having just maybe a little bit of a stressor to something being really stressful, something that can turn into a toxic stress or even a traumatic experience. And I want you to really think about these things, because knowing this, we actually have some of the tools for how to reduce our stress. So what makes something from a stressor to a really big stressor and sends you up this arousal? Novelty, something that's unfamiliar to your brain, something that's new. Uncertainty. So without knowing what's coming, a sense of uncertainty and constant change. Feeling a sense, having a perceived sense that you don't have agency or control. You don't have an ability to impact your environment or have a voice or make choices. And the fourth one is feeling a sense of isolation. So if we think about what's been going on for the last few years with the pandemic and so many things, it checks all those boxes. So we can see why, not just individually, but collectively, we are experiencing such a sense of stress. Now, as we go up this arousal continuum, what happens is the brain, because it wants us to be protected and to survive and be safe, if you go up and your brain and body perceive more stress, more threat, it turns off access or greatly reduces access to the parts of your brain that we call the limbic system. Julie's going to be talking about this in a minute. That has to do with our relationships and our emotions. And it also reduces or entirely cuts off access to your cortex. And Julie's going to talk about why that matters. It matters a lot. So if you are on that arousal continuum and your brain goes into survival mode and says, in order to keep you safe, I'm going to turn off access to big, important parts of your brain that allow you to be thoughtful and reflective and have empathy and show up as your best self in order to just survive, you can understand how that doesn't allow us to do work in the way that we want to do. It doesn't allow us to make good decisions. And there's no shortcuts to being able to, the only way that we can actually get ourselves back to a state of calm is understanding what creates the stressors and using strategies to calm. So this is what we're going to talk about today with you, are ways that you can notice when you're feeling stressed and things you can do to help yourself calm, and how you can notice stress in others and help them calm. Okay, Julie.
You know, this is my favorite part, and many of you may
Yeah.
already know this, but it's a great way to start the foundation because every part of our brain is connected to a way in which we react or respond or ground ourselves. And let's walk through the staircase from the bottom of the brain to the top. If you look at the red part of the brain, we often call it the hindbrain or the survival brain. Perhaps some of you have heard the word, the part of our brain we share with all reptiles on the planet. That red part is kind of, in my mind, in between your mouth and the base of your neck. And this part, because it's your primitive survival brain, it's responsible for your basic survival, like breathing and making you hungry so you eat, so you live longer. And it actually also mobilizes you in times of real or perceived danger or stress by making your heart increase, your blood pressure increase, your pupils dilate, to mobilize your body for survival. So it could be a real emergency, like in California, we have earthquakes, and then my heart starts racing and I mobilize my body, and I've learned that I go under a table. Like, that's real survival in my brain, shuts down all other parts so that I can do that. But also when I have too much stress, this happens. My survival brain kicks in and makes me do one of the F words, right? That we tend to do, which is fight and get irritable and anxious, or run away and hide to protect ourselves, or shut down and freeze and lose our ability to speak or focus or think. Like Julie said, all of those abilities shut off. So our survival brain puts us into fight, flight, or freeze to protect ourselves from real or perceived danger. Now, as you walk up the staircase to the blue section of your amazing brain, the blue part is kind of in between your eyes and your mouth. We call it the limbic brain. It's also known as the mammal brain because we share the functionality with mammals on the planet. Now, I love this part of our brain because it's two big things. We're wired neurobiologically in this part for connection. Like everywhere we walk in the world, we're like, will I be seen? Will I be loved? Will I be accepted? Do I fit in? Many of the stressors you put in the chat box, when there are stressors where we can't interact with people in healthy ways, it increases our stress, which the pandemic has done, right? And everybody has increased levels of stress, so they're living more in the red part of their brain. And then secondly, in this part of the blue mid-limbic brain is also emotions. So two things, relational connection and emotions. And you know that emotions can be calm, small, medium, or large. But what happens when they get large and big? No matter what's going on in our life, whenever our emotions get large, it trips the alarm, the orange part of the brain. We have this built-in smoke detector and alarm that goes off when our emotions rise up too much, or our brain or our body is under real or perceived danger or stress. And guess what happens when the alarm goes off? It sends signals down to our survival brain. Wake up, we need you to either fight, flight, or freeze to protect ourselves. And there's really no ability to decide whether it's real danger or not. It just goes boom, really fast. Now, that is the tour of the downstairs part of the brain. But if we walk up the staircase to the upstairs green part, which can be called the prefrontal cortex or the forebrain, but we often call it the executive brain. It's the part that sets us apart from mammals and reptiles and makes us human. And there's this humane ability for us to use logical reasoning and problem-solving skills and have sustained focal attention and empathy for how someone else feels and look at all sides of a problem, and that big word we always use, self-regulation. Now, to close this part of the brain off, let's remember what Julie Nicholson said earlier. 90% of the time under stress, we can't access the green part of our executive prefrontal cortex. When that shuts off, all of our humane abilities shut off, or many of them do. And we get highly emotional and we react with fight, flight, or freeze. So as we go on this journey, we're going to give ourselves grace because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We have enormous amounts of stress. We know that many of us and people around us have been living in the bottom part of our brain, but with awareness and with building or bringing back to life our toolkit to buffer our stress, we can strengthen ways to protect ourselves and others. I'll go quickly on this one because it's just a visual example of when we have too much stress. Without the balance of our intentional, proactive protecting ourselves from stress with things, even for a moment, that can restore us or give us doses of oxytocin or those healthy chemicals that flow in our body, then guess what's going to happen? It's going to trip the alarm more and more. So when our stress is weighted too much to one side, it can trip the alarm in our brain. But don't be confused. Stress is not a bad thing. Stress is healthy. It mobilized me this morning to study the PowerPoint, so I knew the slides, right? And stress can be very healthy, but prolonged stress and the release of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, releasing stress chemicals through your body without any relief at all, can cause longer term effects that we're going to look at soon. One thing that I might mention is stress is contagious. In our book, we call it mirror neurons. But remember, not only is stress contagious, but calm is contagious. And as we think about stress being contagious and calm being contagious, we name it through this word called mirror neurons. It's so interesting because the more we take care of ourselves and the more we intentionally find more calm in that balance scale, the more we have the power, just the way we are in the world, to lead people to calm. And the more stressed we are, the more others are going to absorb through the neuronal networks our stress, and we can easily lead others through a ripple effect, a contagious effect to stress. And so we're going to look at this example of Drew Giles, who is a director in Silicon Valley of Educare. And we just interviewed him for our book. And here's what he said, which might be an example of what I talked about. He says, I talked to my staff about being a mirror. I'm basically saying when someone comes at you with a lot of escalated energy, we don't want to absorb that energy. But instead, if we stay calm, then they will begin to absorb our calm. In this way, we can lead them to regulation rather than dysregulation. But what's so important to remember is that the hardest thing in the world to do is actually not absorb the stress of other people. You need a big tool, a big fortress to protect yourself when that stress comes at you, so you don't absorb it and allow that person to lead you to dysregulation. But vice versa, we can also lead people to calm or regulation themselves just by our own internal state. Now, we remember that scale that we just looked at, that scale of balance. When there's too much stress over time without the balance of even moments of self-care. I'll never forget when my kids were babies. They're adults now, but when they were babies, I just remember going, oh my God, I can't take it anymore, right? And I remember doing little itty bitty teeny things, like that I could do with my children, like rocking them in a rocking chair, just anything for a moment. And Dr. Bruce Perry says it could take just a minute to actually give yourself a dose of oxytocin to balance your stress. But with too much stress over time, it can lead to things like chronic fatigue, insomnia, forgetfulness, impaired concentration, physiological symptoms in our body because our mind, body, and spirit's all connected. increased vulnerability to illness because of the stress that we have and no protection through positive chemicals that come from self-care, anxiety, depression, anger, or dissociation.
Okay, let's hold all of that. That's so hard. It's hard. It's real, and we want to name it, and we have to bear witness to it and acknowledge it. But we always want to balance that with where's the power that we have to buffer that. And so what I'm going to share, there's a lot of ways that we can build resilience, and that you're constantly doing that. And we want to say, one of the reasons why we love having chat interaction is because you all are going to teach and learn as much from each other as we're going to bring to you. I mean, this is just reality. You have already so many things you're doing that we want to shine a light on and say, good for you, keep doing that. And you're going to be able to inspire one another. So as I'm going to talk through just briefly 4 factors that we know from decades of research predict resilience. These are not all of the ways that we build resilience. There's just a few. But as soon as I'm done with this, we're going to give a space with a little bit more music for you to do, once again, some sharing in the chat box. So I want you to be thinking as I talk about these factors. Am I already doing this every day? Should I remind, can I help connect that to an activity or a stance I'm taking that is building resilience? Or do you see or hear something that's new? And then you also will have an opportunity to share things that I don't talk about that you're doing, okay? So these are the 4, I'm just gonna put them up here: relationships, post-traumatic growth, resilience narratives, agency and control, and addressing the root causes. So let's go through those real quick. So you probably know, because we're early childhood professionals and this is at the heart of everything we do, consistent, attuned, responsive relationships are so important for high quality care. It turns out that they are also the most important thing that buffers stressors for people who are experiencing adversity or even traumatic contexts. If you have somebody who you feel safe with, who respects you and helps you feel that sense of feeling felt, that attunement as you're going through a stressor, somebody who is there with you, whether in the moment of the stressor or immediately after it, this can be it is the most important thing that will buffer that stress or reduce it, is what I mean by buffer, and be that protective factor that could be the difference of you having some short and long-term impacts, like a PTSD or a impact of the trauma, and not having that. So yesterday I was on the Zoom with my dear colleague who was talking about her daughter, who it looks like she probably has long COVID symptoms. And she was, getting all sorts of advice and seeing her medical professionals and so on. My friend and colleague lives here in California. Her daughter lives in Atlanta. And she said, I just flew out to see her, even though it was so hard to do and it's not the best time to travel. And I flew out, just being with her and being present. Her daughter just looked at her and said, Mom, I can't even tell you the difference it's made for me. So just knowing that we get so busy and we think we may not be taking enough time every day to have that text check-in, the call, hearing somebody's voice, reaching out with an email, or even physically being with somebody. It is the most important factor. And it doesn't have to be long. It could be a 5-minute call, but it is really, really important. Resilience narratives. I want to briefly just say this. Okay, we go through stressors in life and adversities, and some of them are very, very painful to talk about. But what I am going to share is the research says that this is so incredibly important. You may not be able to do this in the moment. It might be a long time after. But if you can look at it, adversity that you went through, and find one perceived positive that you can associate with that adversity. And that when you tell the story of going through that hardship, that you talk about the real truth of how hard it was, but then include that one perceived positive, and you put these 2 things together. This is called a resilience narrative. So if you could think about, going through this last year, Did you reconnect with a relationship that you had been taken for granted, or maybe there was a conflict and you made up with this person and you have this renewed relationship? Did you change your health, your eating, or your health habits? People who often go through, heart attacks or different things, like they might make a positive change in terms of their exercise or their eating. You may not take life for granted in the same way. Maybe you have more of a mindfulness in the way that you bring, that you just wake up with every day. There's lots of ways you could think about one perceived positive. And I do want to say it may be hard right now. If you're in the middle of something so traumatic and stressful, you may not be in the place to do this yet. And that's okay. Give yourself grace. But over time, if you can do this, that's a resilience narrative. And it turns out to be able to do that is a really important buffer. Opportunities for agency and control, because feeling like you don't have any sense of control, a sense of helplessness, is a strong predictor for trauma. Being able to find little ways in which you can share your voice or contribute to a conversation. If you're in a staff meeting, giving more opportunities for teachers and providers and staff to offer their ideas, little things. It doesn't have to be big things that we can't control, but little ways in which we can offer people a sense of contributing and having a sense of a voice can make a huge difference. And then this final one, taking actions to disrupt the conditions that create the stress and trauma in the first place. This is so helpful if we can do it. And I'm sharing a very personal experience here. 2 years ago, on January 4th, I was running it right in San Francisco where I live, celebrating that my husband had just finished his final chemo treatment. And I was so happy. And a speeding car came down and hit me. And I was injured very badly. I broke my neck and my back. But I ended up being, it took 8 months to heal. But here's what I'm showing you, taking actions to disrupt the sources that created the stress. Here I came out, I was invited to come and speak. That was at the corner where I was hit, to speak about my lived experience and to fight for more safety. And you can see in the second picture here, they were changing some of the street lights to make things safer at that corner. Up down here, I ran, about a year ago, I ran a marathon to bring attention, or half marathon to bring attention to all the places in my city where traffic violence had happened. And people came from all over and we ran together to try to bring the news out. And then here we are, this was just a couple weeks ago, with Speaker Pelosi and the mayor of our city. And they're able to bring, because of the infrastructure money, some changes to our city. So this is just one example that's my personal example, but you're going to have others. But how are you working to address those conditions that create the stressors? So again, those are just 4 that come from the research. You have other ways that you are strengthening your resilience. We're going to give a minute with some music for you now to just share your ideas in the chat, and Julie will read those out. But think about, what are you currently doing, or what could you do?
Kind friends all gathered round, there's something I would say, that what brings us together here has blessed us all today. Love has made a circle that holds us all inside, where strangers are as family and loneliness can't hide. You must give yourself to love, if love is what you're after. Open up your hearts to the tears and laughter.
Stay and maintain lifetime friendships. Started walking daily outside until it got cold. Intentional downtime with friends, mindfulness, talking with family and friends frequently, relationships. I also created a Zen den for my staff where they're able to sit in a massage chair and relax and regroup. Talking with my daughter daily. Still walking in the cold. Someone says it helps a lot. Relationships with God changed workplaces, surrounded myself with more positive people. Change into PJs as soon as I get home. I'm delegating more and pre-planning and help to be more efficient with my time to reduce my stress. I think this falls under agency and control, taking responsibility for my part in past relationships that were unhealthy. And with this, knowing I can grow and change, spending more quality time with family, talking with friends in long baths, working out more regularly, spending more intentional time with my children and with family, building strong and positive relationships, meditation, prayer, space time with family, and making time to exercise.
Beautiful. You can see what we are talking about. You have so many ideas there. We hope that you're seeing some ideas of things you're already doing, so you can give yourself that sense of grace. And like, even though you may not be doing everything in the way you want to in this pandemic, that you're doing a lot and you want to celebrate and acknowledge that. And maybe you see some new things you might try.
And there's so many more. We encourage you to take a look at the chat, because I'm being inspired even by these things that show us that it can be small things. Somebody
100%.
Yes.
Okay, so we are going to, now we've acknowledged some of the stressors. We've acknowledged how the stressors, if we don't have a toolkit and strategies to reduce stress, can impact our health, create a sense of burnout, that there can be harm done. Now we're going to talk about what are those tools? What are some things that you can do right away? And I'm going to just tell you right here, because of everything you just shared in the chat, the good news is you're already doing a ton of these things, but I'm hoping that you're going to be able to connect dots in a new way and say, oh, that's why this is so helpful or valuable for me. So we're going to kind of give you some new language that's based in the science of the brain to recognize why what you just described is so needed, urgent, and necessary. So our wonderful, again, inspiration, Dr. Bruce Perry, talks about how when brain scientists look at what are the ways with somebody who has had a fight, flight, freeze, activated brain, or just experiences a stressor, what are ways that you can bring them down that arousal continuum to a state of calm? And it turns out there's 4 ways, and we're going to talk through these. The first is this relational regulation, and there's top-down strategies, bottom-up regulation strategies, and something called intentional disconnection strategies. We're going to go through each of these, and as we do, I want to say that one of the things Bruce Perry talks about is that the most important and helpful is always if you can use relational with something else. Okay. So because of that sense that relationship is the most important way of reducing stress and preventing us from having long-term harm from stress, that's why he talks about this. Okay, Julie, you were going to start with this one.
So we'd already talked about the first pathway. The most important foundation is relationships. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm an introverted person. I tend to be more on the introversion scale. So for someone like me, it's different than someone like my son who's more extroverted. So you have to define this for yourself, but it's the people that make us feel safe and cared for, that buffer our stress, that bring us to higher levels of health, that are there for us and listen to us. And the reverse is also true. When we are a part of organizations or systems that don't value us or show care for us, it can increase our levels of stress. And so the more our organizations and systems value people, like the person who typed in the chat, putting the relaxation chairs in a Zen den, boy, I want to work for you because that would tell me that you care about me. And these kinds of small acts can really, really restore us and buffer our stress. but also the choices that we make and the people that we surround ourselves with. I want to just mention something else, but I'm hoping we can go to the next slide so I can just describe this a little more before we invite you to an activity around this. This is going to be a time where we're going to invite you in just a moment to type in the chat. Thinking about relationships, it's not always what you think it is. So I'm going to expand our definition a little bit. They can be people that are alive and around us all the time, or we can access them through Zoom or phone. They can also be our ancestors, people that are no longer alive, that live in our heart and our soul, that we just think about in our mind, that brings us a buffer of our stress or brings us joy. They can be the animals that we surround ourselves with that also provide that relational connection. It can also be images. Like when I was a little girl, I had a lot of trauma and it was from my father. And I used to watch, I didn't know this till recently, Julie, but I watched a lot of television shows with amazing fathers. And I think those images was my attempt to have in my mind what a relationship with a father could look like. And I actually believe that was something that really helped me. So sometimes they're images of historical figures or loved ones. And for many of us, it's also a higher power. And whatever you call that higher power, it can be God, that relationship with God or Jesus or Buddha or whatever your beliefs might be. So given all of that, maybe taking a moment to invite you, if you feel comfortable privately, publicly, or even just sitting and leaning in without sharing, what relational strategies do you use to buffer your stress and ground yourself, or even restore your energy?
And Julie, while people are thinking and typing, I want to share an organizational example that came out this week. I was talking with a colleague. He does coaching all across the country for early childhood professionals and systems and so on. And he said he was on a state call with all of the early Head Start directors and Head Start directors in that state, and how they were all just in so much distress because of the staff crisis and so many teachers and providers who are leaving. And they were, bearing witness and supporting one another. But one director spoke up and said, I haven't lost anybody on my staff since the beginning of the pandemic. And she said, I was surprised. I didn't, because I saw these patterns all around me and I didn't know why. And I asked my staff, why are you staying? And she said, what they told me blew my mind because they said, you make us feel seen and heard and valued as people before we are teachers. And she said, how do I do that? And they said, when we walk in the morning, you ask us about, how's your daughter? How's your husband? How are things going with your look for housing, or what have you? But she said these moments were sticking with them. And they said, we want more money. We're afraid sometimes in our job, but you help us feel like human beings. And this is relational regulation right there.
Oh, Julie, that's such a great example. Let me read a few as well.
Okay.
Earlier, people shared a lot about family and friends, right? And then I love this one example that Laureen shared, recognizing when my staff is getting stressed, letting them leave early, or staff field trips or lunch or fun activities. Mm-hmm. And then other folks shared prayer, know the way, the truth, and the life, Christ Jesus. My mother is a teacher. We're very close. And as a principal, she keeps me in check in my profession. My SO is my person to keep my grounding in personal life. Prayer and digging into the Bible. My dog is such a comfort to me. Mm-hmm. And many folks are sharing animals as well, and dogs. And let's see, like the idea of images, especially of a friend that lives far away that I don't get to see as much, to diffuse, like when we do, like we used to do schedules referring to our image, maybe a bridge. My husband keeps me grounded, my staff and prayer, my new coworkers, my relationship with God and my animals, and so much family. And some people are listing their organization and the staff are grounding to one another.
That's beautiful. And remember what Bruce Perry says, having this in addition to the strategies we're going to talk about. Thank you, Casey, my team, and huge, this is, we really can, I hope that example with the Head Start and Early Head Start directors says to you, this is something I can make a difference on today, tomorrow, right away. It doesn't cost money. It also, one other organizational piece, Drew Giles, who we gave you the quote earlier about the mirror neurons, he recognizes we all have so much urgency and so much we have to talk through in our staff meetings. And it feels like we don't have time to start with a relational connection or to end with one. And here I'm going to tell you, and Julie's going to tell you, it's the most important thing you could do. To spend even just 5 minutes, 7 minutes in the beginning, if you have a 1 hour meeting or half-hour meeting, taking time to check in and give people that sense of agency and voice to talk and to relate to one another and learn about what's going on for you, what you're bringing into the room besides your professional self. It's going to help them regulate down that arousal continuum so they can actually open their cortex and do the planning and thinking and reflecting and all of that. So it's not taking time away. It's actually helping you build the relationships you need and helping create that buffer as an organization where people are going to stay and they're going to feel supported and valued and seen. Okay, anything else, Julie, or should we move on to the...
I was trying to unmute myself. It wasn't working. There were so many because I got so excited. And I think I just thanked everybody for sharing. And I really encourage people to go to the chat to even read more, because I actually feel when I read them, it makes me feel like a sense of joy as well and gives me ideas.
Beautiful. And, we hear so much things. Well, we're going to talk about this in our next session, but self-care is often talked about is go have a bubble bath or eat chocolate covered strawberries. And those things are nice, but this is where the power is to help you reduce stress and really help you feel that you can cope and navigate through these very trying times. Okay. So let's go to this one. Okay. And here's where you're going to start to see, oh my gosh, so many of the things I shared, I'm doing this. Okay. Relational is the most important. We want to do that with everything else. If you find yourself or somebody else on that arousal continuum is actually quite stressed, you're not maybe at the place of terror, but even if you are, let's say that you're just at that, like, really feeling activated, really feeling stressed, not a little bit, but like a medium or large feeling of overwhelm, stress, exhaustion, helplessness. This is the strategy for you to regulate. We call it bottom up because what these things do is that they go to your core regulatory networks right here. Julie talked about that at the base of the brain where your survival instincts are, and they regulate you the absolute fastest of all of the different strategies we're going to talk about. So again, if you need to regulate fast because you find yourself going up that continuum of stress and dysregulation, you want to start with a bottom up. So these are things that are what we call somatosensory and patterned. So they're rhythmic, they're patterned. They are somato, you know what sensory is, right? Based in the senses. And the somato means movement oriented. So when you put together a pattern that engages the senses, that is movement oriented, you can go right to the core, the networks to calm yourself down or to calm somebody else down. He thinks that there's some thinking that this might be the fastest and the most, that it might be as supportive for regulation as it is, because when we think about our earliest associations in the brain that were in utero, think about what a baby experienced, right? If they were in utero, your needs are met, hopefully, not everybody, but let's imagine a healthy pregnancy with a child who's not, a parent and child who's not experiencing malnutrition or something. Your needs are being met, you're in a warm environment, you have the swishing of the uterine environment, and the heartbeat is that somatosensory that's patterned, and a child associated that, the brain, with feeling safe, feeling calm, feeling regulated. Okay. So these are, you see some of the examples here. How many of you, when you're kind of stressed and you just start to rock back and forth, or to get up and stretch, or to put music on, can calm you, to pet a dog, to hum, to be, this is why it's so calming to be in a choir or to sing in a group, because not only are you feeling that in your body, you're being calmed by that somatosensory input of others. Breathing, drumming, and anything rhythmic. And by the way, this works for children and adults. So you can be doing sort of music or rhythmic activities, mindfulness, engaging, being in nature absolutely brings that. Engaging in the five senses, we're going to talk about this, but just drinking warm tea, eating things, going outside, having the fresh air. All of these things are important ways of regulating very fast. So if you are noticing that your staff, you're in a meeting or you're trying to make a big decision and people are just stressed and not attending, giving that 5-minute break or taking a moment to breathe or having a stretch break, it's exactly what everybody needs. Julie, do you want to add anything?
I do. I want to say that we develop stress patterns over time, according to the trauma researchers. And the stress patterns unconsciously, our breathing and the way we move our body and our eyeballs can be fixed to match our levels of stress. So sometimes it's just a simple, very quick bottom of the brain strategy that I started using, like turning my eyeballs to the left or the right, or opening my mouth and closing my mouth, or turning my head to the left or the right. It sort of sends a message through the 10th cranial nerve that you're not in fight, flight, or freeze, that you can loosen up and put on the brakes and calm down. And this is really powerful.
So let's see if we can go to the next one. We're going to just look at an example. Here's teacher Emily. She has this parent meeting that's coming up. She's really worried about it, whether it's on Zoom or face-to-face. She knows it's going to be stressful. She has to talk about some hard emotional things about this child. So she knows about somatosensory regulation. She sets up in the middle of the table some coloring paper, some markers and pens, being able to do that drawing. This is why it's calming for a lot of us to be able to draw or fidget right in the middle of a stressful or long, intense meeting. She has fidget objects. She sets out a kettle with warm water, tea, and biscuits. She's aware that when she can fidget, color, or draw, and have something to drink or something to eat, it helps her to feel regulated. But she also puts on some calming music in the background. So these are sending signals to everybody there in the environment that the brain is automatically picking up on. This is going to help calm you. You don't even have to be aware of it. It's just sort of unconsciously going to help you calm and regulate. We're going to take a minute now to do something called the shakeout, which is a somatosensory regulation strategy. Okay, so you can turn off your video if you don't want to be seen, but you can stand, you can sit. And this is something you can do with children, you can do with adults. It's going to take 3 minutes, but it's an example of a way to just regulate in the middle of a meeting or a training. To go to those core regulatory networks. Okay, so we're going to be shaking our hands and our feet. And again, you can stand or sit. Okay, and if you can, no matter, maybe you can't do this where you are, but if you can, I really encourage you to actually say to vocalize as we're going through this. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, so we're going to start right hand up and we're going to count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, left hand, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right foot, 5, kick it, 4, 3, 2, 1, left foot, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you know what this is. We're going to start and go down from 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, right foot, 4, 3, 2, 1, left foot, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, everybody, you might be feeling a little bit of your heart, beat a little more. You might be a little, have a faster breath. But it's a way of sort of moving things around in your body, circulating your blood, getting some of that movement and stretching. It is going right to the core regulatory networks. And when you are vocalizing like that, it sends a reverberation into your body. And if you can be in a group where you're hearing other people, you also get that extra sensory input. And it goes automatically to your vagal nerve, which impacts your parasympathetic nerve. It calms you down. It brings you down that regulation or that arousal staircase. So very simple example of something you can do yourself with a staff, with children to calm in 3 minutes. Okay, Julie.
I love that, Julie. I just looked at my heart rate. It was at 100 after that. But guess what also happened? I have opened the top of my brain for business, right? Like
100%. Yep.
I told my brain and my body, you're not in danger. You're okay. You're grounded by doing that movement. And now I can access my thinking brain. However, this is another pathway to remind you always with relationship paired with one of these is the strongest pathway coupled together. However, top of the brain strategies, let's explore these together. And we'll even invite you in the chat box to share along the way. Do you ever use a top of the brain strategies? Now, sometimes this is the hardest pathway to use for some because 90% of the time we can't access the top of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, when we are in distress, right? It shuts down, it flips off. However, I personally, because of the trauma that I went through as a little girl, this was my first pathway when I went away to college to regulation. When I was in counseling and thinking about things was the safest pathway for me because traditionally emotions were dangerous for me as a little girl. I wasn't allowed to have them. So you might find this pathway as a common one for you. This is things like thinking and imagining of some of the grounders, like a person or a place or an object or an activity that you associate with grounding you, like thinking of that hammock I was in Hawaii 20 years ago. When I bring that to my mind, it calms me. Sometimes when I get up in the middle of the night with my worry or anxious brain on, I'll pull out my journal and I'll start writing down what I'm worried about and mapping out a solution. And then I feel more in control and I can go to sleep. Many people have shared with us, they use a prayer or a mantra or self-talk. Things like this too shall pass, or something that you say to yourself that actually grounds or calms you. Another top of the brain strategy is counseling or professional support, but also talking to someone you feel safe with. It could be a confidant, a colleague, a trusted friend, a religious leader. It could be your parent, your sibling, your spouse, and journaling. So I encourage you just to, if you feel comfortable, jot a few things in the chat box that you might use to feel grounded and safe using top of the brain that you might already use or want to use.
While they're doing that, I just want to reinforce that these are the strategies that we so often go to in our, I would say nationally, Bruce Perry talks about this. This is our primary focus of reducing stress. And yet remember what we talked about in the very beginning. If you are really stressed, your brain cuts off your access to the cortex to do these. So these things work, but not when you're really, really stressed. So we want to just keep that in mind. Yeah.
And someone shared they talk with their coworkers or journal. So yeah, these are some good examples, and we'd love to read more as we go along. Maybe we should go to the next slide and then we can.
Okay, great. There you go, Julie.
Oh my goodness, this is the fourth pathway that many people have said they love and already do. It's called intentional disengagement or disconnection. Now, we're not talking about unhealthy disengagement or disconnection, like abusing drugs or alcohol is an unhealthy disconnection. We're talking about intentional moments where you do the opposite of focal attention. You allow your brain to wander. Have you ever laid on the bed and just looked up at the ceiling and was like, whoa, my brain was just going on like 20 rabbit holes, just wandering or stargazing? Sometimes it's when you just tune out for a brief moment during a training or a meeting. Sometimes it's guided imagery, intentional guided imagery or prayer or meditation. And other times it's strategies like losing yourself in reading or theater, watching TV, art, baking, taking a shower, picking weeds, gardening, hiking. Children do this so naturally. Somehow they are just magically able to play in the moment and lose themselves in the moment with play and fun and losing track of time. And sometimes this can also include intentionally disengaging from people that bring us stress or situations if we have control over that. Julie, do you want to add anything?
And this isn't related to stress necessarily, but it's been so interesting for me to go deeper into reading about people who are most creative thinkers and how you support individuals and groups to build insights and to have sort of the most creative, innovative part of their brains working. What do they find? That you need daydreaming and mind wandering opportunities, and that we often feel like that's unproductive time. But because of the way the brain works, this is actually how we build insights and creativity and innovation. So this is separate from stress reduction as a strategy, but just giving yourself that time to disconnect and let your mind wander is so important. And for too long, it's gotten a bad rap. It's like you're not being productive, right? Yeah. So.
And Julie, I'll read a couple in the chat as we move on, but just a happy place for me is going camping or listening to the river, or I hear my grandmother say, in the grand scheme of eternity, how does this matter? Oh, I'm going to adopt that too, that mantra, right? Perspective is everything. And someone else shared, sharing my feelings with my husband, cooking, eating, and cleaning is grounding. Yep.
Great. And one other thing we'll say, if somatosensory is the fastest way to regulate, top down is the most popular, the kind of things that you hear about. What Bruce Perry will tell us is that intentional disengagement is what your brain does most often. So you automatically your brain does this, and you probably find yourself in trainings, maybe this one, in meetings, just momentarily disconnecting, maybe because you're thinking about your tasks that you have to get done, or maybe because you're actually thinking about what somebody is talking about and you're connecting it to your life. But this is a way that your brain is constantly trying to regulate its own stress. Okay, so we have this example about teacher Grace, who is driving home after a long and really stressful day. She's an infant toddler teacher provider. Right before she left, another teacher called her out and was lecturing her about not following a particular COVID or whatever procedure correctly. And as she started home, Grace felt really on edge. She felt really irritated that she was sort of called out in front of others. And, she was like, I did 1,000 things right today, and I forgot to do that one thing. And that was what was called out. Her mind was racing, and she was with such thoughts as, I'm such a bad teacher. I don't even know why I do this work. I work so hard and nobody ever even recognizes that. I just do everything wrong. During her 40-minute drive home, she's put on she was listening to a book on tape. And during that time, she completely lost herself in this story. And for that short moment, she had this intentional disconnection from what we call the stuck points, or that racing thoughts, that of course those racing thoughts were sending her up the arousal continuum, right? But she had this moment to disconnect and just engage herself in listening to that story on tape. She felt a little calmer when she got home, just because of that, and a little bit more regulated. She may or may not have been aware of that, but that's kind of what was going on for her. It gave her brain a break from the stress of those mind loops and her racing thoughts. But she was like, okay, wow, having that novel was a way of shutting off my racing mind. That was the intentional disengagement. But then she walked in and oh my goodness, she was so grateful. Her 2 children had started cooking dinner. They had set the table. She heard their laughter right as she walked in, and she just felt that calming sense of the relational regulation. So here's the combination of these 2 things that probably for teacher Grace created the buffer that stopped the release of those harmful stress chemicals and allowed her to actually have a true buffering of her stress. Julie, do you want to add anything?
No, it was such a great example.
Okay. So one thing is, Dina, if you could just confirm for us what our stop time is, that would be helpful. We weren't sure if it was 1:30. We want to make sure to honor your program.
No, actually, we got, with all of the different little things going on today, we got a little off, but we're actually ahead of schedule somehow. And so we don't have this stopping until around 3, but we can also stop early. If you get to the end of your presentation, we can take either a little longer break or choose to take a shorter break and continue on and end earlier. So
oh, great. Thank you. And I should have said 2:30. I'm on Pacific Standard Time. Okay, fantastic. Okay. That's great to know. Well, we love always having time. We just wanted to make sure. So given that, I'm thinking, Julie, let's sort of think on the fly here. Dina, can I ask one more question? Do we have the opportunity of having people have some time in a breakout room? Does that work, or should we not do that?
We do. We have, like I said, right now it's scheduled until 3 o'clock for this portion. So
okay. Because I think, does that sound workable to you, Julie? I think it would be lovely to stop right now to give you some time to really kind of think about this and how these relational paths to regulation, how they relate to you, what works, what doesn't work, like what feels authentic to you, what are some of the things you're already doing, what are things you might want to try, and to be able to have that time to connect with people, because that's helpful, but to teach and learn from one another just by sharing your ideas. So if we could create groups, and let's give it a full 10 minutes or something, and then we'll come back and hear from you what you talked about. Does that?
And I can create them. It looks like I can create maybe 6 to 7 people per group. How does that sound, Julie?
That sounds great.
All right, everybody. So we're giving you this opportunity to be able to chat about what is on the screen right now. And Julie will share this to your breakout room as well, so that you can visually see the 4 pathways to regulation. Elevate your collective wisdom, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. I'm going to open the rooms right now.
Oh, yeah. Birdseed cookies. Fresh out of my Granny Bird's oven.
Oh. Tell me about your Granny Bird.
Oh, I love her a lot. She's sweet, and she's caring, and she made my favorite blanket. Oh, just thinking of Granny Bird always makes me happy.
Big Bird, how are you feeling now?
Well, I feel safe and much calmer inside. Thank you, Alan. That really helped.
I'm glad. And you can visit your safe place anytime you need to. It's always there for you. And guess what?
What?
So am I.
Well, let's look at some of the comments in the chat box. We've got relational regulation. Yep, Alan really connecting. Alan could have walked into the store and be like, Big Bird, what are you doing right now? Are you really drinking a milkshake when you weren't supposed to? But instead, Alan noticed Big Bird's facial expressions and, approached with calm voice and tone, intentional disconnection, right? The ability to just use my imagination to disconnect for a moment and to use some things that bring me joy. Using a top of the brain strategy to think of a grounder. Yes, Amber. And bottom of the brain strategies, and feeling that love and care and respect. We remember that the number one pathway to regulation is in the presence of someone that listens and encourages us and helps us reach a higher place or grounds us. An intentional disconnection. Yes. Let's look at the next slide and see what we've got.
Do you want me to pull them up?
Yeah, let's pull them all up.
Okay.
So the attunement, you all talked about that, the relational regulation from Alan, but also Alan's voice tone. See, Julie talked about in the beginning of the training that when we're in the presence of another person, we are taking in data all the time to decide whether we are safe or not with that person. And a voice tone and body movements and nonverbal cues can relay safety, or they can relate alarm. And so nonverbal body cues mirrored calm. Helping Big Bird express feelings is a top of the brain strategy. Imagining a safe place, person or object is top of the brain, right? It's like the nest and Granny Bird and the birdseed cookies and stuffed animal radar and the blanket. But the breathing, take a deep breath in and out, that was a bottom of the brain strategy, and so was helping Big Bird engage one of the five senses, hearing the birds in the breeze, feeling the warmth of the sun, seeing nature, smelling of the cookies. So we just wanted to close all of those by watching that with one another.
And let's just look at Cynthia, absolutely another bottom-up strategy, that background music, being in nature and feeling the sun on the feathers. So again, there's nothing that we're introducing today that you probably don't have an intuitive sense of, yeah, that makes sense. I love going outside and feeling the sun on my back, or going out in nature and taking a hike or a horseback ride or hunting or whatever you do, or calling Granny, these things. But we're hopefully making this really clear to you that your brain is wired to actually use these things to protect you, to reduce your stress, to help you get back to calm. So as Julie said, your cortex is open. And well, I want to say two things. We do want our cortex open. If you don't have your cortex open, you can't problem solve. You can't build empathy. Let me say it in the positive, actually. With your cortex open, you can problem solve. You can attune to others and build empathy. You have control over you can self-regulate your emotions and your behavior, so you can be less reactive and more of a listener. You can think about time in much more complex ways when your cortex is open. You can think back and reflect on the past. You can also think forward. So for all of you who are needing to lead organizations or systems or programs or schools into planning forward, strategic planning, or how to use certain dollars, or what program, what curriculum, that's thinking about time in a complex way that's not just the here and now, but forward. You have to have your cortex open. If you're in the fight, flight, freeze, you can only think about time in the here and now. And all of these things, so we want to be able to do these grounding strategies for that reason, to have our cortex open, to do the work, to show up in the way that we're doing no harm to ourselves or others, and we're living our values and our mission. But here's another thing. It's not just for that. And we're going to talk about this in our next session. It's because we care about all of you. We want to show up and not create harm for others, and to do our work well. But we also want you not to be flooded with the stress chemicals that lead to high blood pressure, to, all sorts of problems, right? And so these are the pathways that help you stay in good health and prevent that buffer to, create a buffer for your own stress. Julie, do you want to say anything else before we move on?
No, I think it would be lovely to end with a Padlet, but I want to share just one thing. I think of it like, have you ever been to an amusement park and you've ridden on the bumper cars and the goal is to drive 100 miles an hour into your loved ones or strangers, and that's supposed to bring joy, right? But like, why don't they get hurt and why do you not get hurt? And I think it's that bumper around the outside of the bumper car. And we all need it because life is stressful and we happen to be in more unprecedented amounts of stress than normal for many people. And we need to be our own emergency first responders. So the more we practice building that buffer, the more we'll be able to have that stress bounce off of us and not cause the longer term harm physically, emotionally, and socially for ourselves. And remembering also that we never talk about trauma without also talking about resilience. And in the depths of our DNA, we carry sources of strength and knowledge. And just like Julie worded it intuitively, we know how to do these things. And sometimes we forget because the cortex flips off and we go into survival mode. And so I hope that we'll be able to build deeper on this when we go to the breakout. So we really look forward to being with you in the next session.
Before we close, because we have this gift of time, we're going to close with a Padlet. But before we do that, are there any burning questions that you either want to unmute and ask or put in the chat box? We want to make sure that we're addressing all of your wonderings, questions, grapplings before we close the keynote. Maybe I'll put on music for 30 seconds and just give folks who want to type it a second to do that. And if we don't have any, then we can go into our closing Padlet, but let's give a second here.
I know exactly what you're thinking. I've had those thoughts a million times. I can see the question that's behind your eyes. Oh, you're searching for your peace of mind. Now listen up to this truth. You are me and I am you. Every one of us is worthy. Baby, girl, worthy woman. Every one of us is worthy. I know your life, I felt your pain. I know your joys and your shames. Sometimes it feels like life walks over you, or like you're a penny on the ground. But either on the ground or in your purse, the smallest piece still holds its worth. Everyone.
Thank you. That's so helpful and appreciated. And we didn't see any questions, so I think we're going to move through to our closing. Julie, do you want to say anything about this before I pull up the Padlet?
Just on your PowerPoint, you have ways to stay in touch with us.
Okay. And we'll stay on here for a few minutes in case folks want to private chat us or talk with us about anything. Thank you.
Julie's, again, this has been phenomenal. I could listen to you all day long, and I totally appreciate all of your expertise and knowledge that you share.